November 3, 2009. The serene waters of Bayou Grande in Pensacola, Florida, held a dark secret. A local fisherman stumbled upon a heavy duffel bag floating near the West Bank. Inside, investigators would soon discover the body of 25-year-old Samira Watkins, a mother, 2 months pregnant, silenced forever. But how did she get here? Who was behind this shocking crime? And why? Before we dissect the details of Samira's murder, we need to understand who she was. Samira was a 25-year-old single mother, raising a young son in Pensacola, Florida. Her friends and family describe her as a warm-hearted woman who is working hard to build a stable life for herself and her child. She had recently emerged from an abusive relationship with William Peters, and it seemed like she was finally reclaiming her happiness. Samira's encounter with Zachary Littleton seemed like a new beginning. They met online, and Littleton, a Navy police officer, was everything Samira thought she needed after leaving a difficult relationship. He was charismatic, caring, and promised stability, qualities that appealed to Samira. What she didn't know was that Zachary Littleton was hiding a dark secret. He was already married with a young daughter. Samira's family and friends say that she believed she had finally found someone who would care for her and her child. Littleton appeared attentive at first, showering Samira with affection and promises. But as soon as Samira revealed that she was pregnant, things began to change. Littleton became distant, evasive, and their once promising relationship began to crumble. At this point, Samira didn't know that Littleton was leading a double life. His wife, who also served in the Navy, was stationed elsewhere but was set to move to Pensacola soon. This situation put Littleton in a precarious position. Samira's pregnancy threatened to expose his affair, ruin his marriage, and damage his military career. Adultery is a serious crime under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, and for Littleton, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Littleton tried to convince Samira to get an abortion, but she refused. She wanted to keep the baby, believing it would solidify their relationship. Samira's refusal marked the beginning of a deadly chain of events. On October 29, 2009, Samira left her home to meet Littleton, believing that they would work things out. She had no idea that this would be the last time anyone would see her alive. Samira had spoken to her family earlier that day, mentioning that Littleton had called her to his apartment to discuss their future together and the pregnancy. She left hopeful, thinking she might resolve the tension that had been building between them. But as the hours passed, her family began to grow anxious. Samira hadn't returned home, and their calls to her went unanswered. Samira was known for being responsible, especially when it came to her son. It was out of character for her to disappear without notifying anyone. The next day, Samira's family reported her missing. The Pensacola police were notified, and they began a search for any trace of her whereabouts. Initially, the investigation was slow, as there were no clear signs of foul play. Samira's friends and family, however, feared the worst. They told investigators about her strained relationship with Littleton and her plans to meet him on the day she went missing. As detectives dug deeper, the last person to have contact with Samira became a prime suspect, Zachary Littleton. His behavior during this early stage of the investigation was calculated. He claimed that while he had been involved with Samira, their relationship had ended weeks before. Littleton said he hadn't seen her recently, casting doubt on the idea that he was involved in her disappearance. Littleton's calm demeanor didn't sit well with investigators. They began pressing him for more details, especially given the fact that Samira had reportedly been on her way to meet him the night she vanished. Littleton stuck to his story, maintaining that their affair was over and that Samira was no longer a part of his life. However, investigators noticed inconsistencies in his story. Phone records would later show that Samira had been in contact with Littleton up until the night of her disappearance. Even more disturbing was the fact that Littleton had failed to mention his wife and child to Samira or her family, a major red flag that something wasn't right. On a calm autumn morning, just 5 days after Samira's disappearance, a fisherman made a gruesome discovery in Bayou Grande, not far from the Pensacola Naval Air Station. Floating near the shoreline was a duffel bag. When investigators opened it, they found the lifeless body of Samira Watkins. Samira's body had been strangled, and her mouth covered with duct tape, signaling a deliberate and premeditated killing. She had been left to decompose in the Florida waters, but due to the bag's buoyancy, her body hadn't sunk as intended. The recovery of Samira's body triggered a flood of emotions for her family and community. Not only had they lost a mother, daughter, and sister, but she was 2 months pregnant with her second child. It became clear to investigators that this was not a random crime but a carefully orchestrated murder meant to silence Samira forever. Forensic examiners confirmed that Samira had died from asphyxiation caused by strangulation. The duct tape on her mouth was likely placed there to prevent her from screaming during the assault. In addition, investigators found that she had been stuffed into the duffel bag post-mortem, a cold, calculated act to dispose of her body, and any evidence linking back to the killer. One key detail caught the investigators' attention. Samira was missing one of her earrings. The other was still attached to her body, but this missing earring would play a pivotal role in linking the crime back to Zachary Littleton later on. Following the discovery of Samira's body, the investigation took on a new urgency. Detectives returned to Zachary Littleton, whose initial claims of innocence were starting to crack under the weight of new evidence. While Littleton had tried to distance himself from the case, the missing earring and further investigative work began to expose holes in his story. Law enforcement also noted the lack of defensive wounds on Samira's body, suggesting that she had likely been subdued before her death. This indicated that Samira might have been attacked by someone she trusted, someone like Littleton, who could have caught her off guard. Around this time, detectives discovered surveillance footage and receipts that painted a damning picture of Littleton's movements on the night of the murder. Footage from a nearby Waffle House showed him in the vicinity, and a taxi driver's receipt placed him at the scene shortly after Samira's estimated time of death. Additionally, Littleton had taken suspicious steps to distance himself from the crime. Not only had he cleaned his apartment, but detectives later discovered a pack of disinfectant wipes in his apartment that matched those found near Samira's body. The link was undeniable. Littleton had staged the crime, hoping to outsmart investigators, but crucial pieces of evidence were starting to stack against him. By this point, Zachary Littleton's calm facade had begun to crumble. Detectives now had enough evidence to believe that Littleton was involved in Samira's death. What they didn't yet have was a motive solid enough to build their case. Why would Littleton, a Navy officer, resort to murder? What had led him down such a dark path? The deeper investigators dug, the more it became clear that Littleton's primary motivation was self-preservation. He had built a precarious double life, married with a child, yet engaged in an affair with Samira. Samira's pregnancy threatened not only to unravel his personal life, but also to ruin his military career. In the military, adultery is a punishable offense under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and if Littleton's affair were exposed, he could have lost everything. On November 23, 2009, nearly a month after Samira's murder, Zachary Littleton was arrested at Pensacola Naval Air Station. He was charged with first-degree murder and held without bond. The arrest was a massive moment for Samira's family and friends, who had feared that her killer might escape justice. While Littleton continued to deny any involvement in the crime, the evidence against him was mounting. As the case moved toward trial, the prosecution prepared to prove that Littleton had meticulously planned Samira's murder to protect his secret life. But would they be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Littleton had killed Samira to cover up his lies? The next episode will dive into the trial and the courtroom drama that unfolded. The trial of Zachary Littleton attracted considerable attention, both locally and within the Navy community. With a Navy officer accused of murdering his pregnant lover, the case was filled with salacious details that captivated the public. Pretrial motions focused heavily on the admissibility of certain pieces of evidence, with Littleton's defense team attempting to block the introduction of several key items, most notably the earring found in his apartment and the surveillance footage from the Waffle House. Littleton's defense team also tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, claiming there was no definitive proof linking him to Samira's murder. Despite these efforts, the judge ruled that much of the prosecution's evidence would be allowed in court. The prosecution, led by Assistant State Attorney John Mulchin, focused on painting a picture of Littleton as a man who was willing to kill to protect his reputation and career. They laid out a timeline of events that began with Littleton luring Samira to his apartment under the guise of discussing their future together, and then strangling her when she refused to terminate the pregnancy. Prosecutors also emphasized the planning that had gone into the crime. Littleton's digital footprint revealed searches related to hiding a body and avoiding detection. They presented the earring as definitive proof that Samira had been at Littleton's apartment the night she died. The surveillance footage and phone records added further weight to the prosecution's argument, showing that Littleton had lied about his whereabouts on the night of the murder. After weeks of testimony and emotional pleas from Samira's family, the jury returned its verdict. On June 2011, Zachary Littleton was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Samira's family, the verdict was a bittersweet victory. Justice had been served, but nothing could bring Samira or her unborn child back.